Hello, Dr. Suzanne Bechtel here to introduce this tutorial on nailing the citing of statutes and constitutions, basically covering really good coverage of Rules 13 and 14.
Hi, in this lecture, we're going to be learning about Rule 13 and 14. Rule 13 has to do with Constitution. So if you turn to Rule 13 in your ALWD book, you're going to find on the first page, you're going to see the fast formats. In fast formats on page 108 of the 7th edition of the ALWD book, this is going to give you the immediate, fast way to fill in the format for the Constitution. So here we're talking about the U.S. Constitutions first, and then the state constitutions second. Now, the U.S. Constitution is going to be in this following format, which you're going to find in Rule 13.2. What you must realize is that when we're citing for the U.S. Constitution, we want to make sure that we are currently citing everything that is currently in force. If for some reason it's not currently in force, meaning that it's been repealed or amended, there is a particular format listed here for you to use when we're reflecting something that has been no longer put in force. There's also a second format, which you're not going to be responsible for in this class, which is this one here, which is more spelled out, but I think the other way is much cleaner. When it comes to state constitutions, there is a particular format for that as well. Please note that there's going to be a shortcut that I'm going to show you in the appendix on how to quickly find that state's particular format for citing the state constitution. So currently what you're going to be doing is you're going to be following the format that's in Rule 13.2. Here you're going to have the abbreviated jurisdiction name, a space, the Constitution, a space, and then a pinpoint reference. We haven't learned pinpoint references yet. That will be in the next lecture video. But pinpoint for right now, just think of it as where exactly can I find the section that you are wanting to reference, such as a particular statute number or a particular amendment or section of the source that you're looking for. So the name of the Constitution is going to be abbreviated, and here it tells us how we are going to do that plus the additional spacing. So remember, the little red triangles is where you're going to insert a space. So you are also going to be using ordinary type when we're naming the U.S. Constitution and also the state constitution, meaning it's not going to be italicized, it's not going to be underlined either. In 13.2b, it talks about the pinpoint reference. So this is the subdivision that you are going to be using. Please note that here it references Appendix 3C when it comes to abbreviations. So that is going to be our section in the back that's going to have those subdivisions. Now, if it's going to be a U.S. Constitution, you're going to be using Roman numerals, meaning our normal numbers. I'm sorry, not the normal numbers. The Roman numerals are going to be used for the Constitution, articles, and amendments. Now, when it comes to the lesser sections, such as this section here, which is section 9, clause number 2, those we're going to be using Arabic numbers, which are regular numbers. For the state constitution, you're going to follow their system, and I'm going to show you in the appendix how to quickly locate that. Now in 13.2, it talks about dates. The dates are actually going to be omitted if it's going to be for something that's currently in force. If for some reason the date is something that is important, you can include it in the parenthetical in the back, meaning such as here where it says amended in 1998. That would be important to know, so you would actually include that in a parenthetical. In 13.2D, if it's going to be part of a publication of a commercial database or an official site, this tells you how to do that. For the purposes of this class, we are no longer going to be requiring you that to know that. In 13.2E, if it was part of a footnote, which is not for our class, you would pay attention to the format here, but for the purposes of this class, you don't have to know that either. All right, and then 13.2, it goes into historical constitutions. I would not worry about that as well for the purposes of this class, but you can always follow the examples as it's cited here. And 13.4, we're not going to learn that until later on in the semester. For Rule 14, this is where we're going to be learning about the statutes. Please note that there's federal statutes and there's also state statutes. The fast format actually shows you quickly what the formulas are. But for the state statutes, I would actually recommend to use Appendix 1B, and we're going to be learning about that shortly. So when we're talking about state statutes, you want to make sure that you are addressing the official reporters when you're able to. Appendix 1B will actually show you in a red star, which is going to be the official source. If the official source is not available, then that's when you can actually cite to one of the other sources, such as the annotated version, which is actually my favorite to use, especially when you start researching. But then you have to go back and find the official code. In Rule 14.2, this is where you're going to find the full citation to the federal statutes currently in force. So remember, this is our formula, and we work to try to find what information needs to go into each section. So sometimes it's going to be a well-known statute, and it'll have an official name. More likely than not, you're not going to have the official name, but if you want to include something or if it's required, then you can actually list it out here using the spacing as shown. So remember that the official name is actually going to be used in ordinary type, meaning it's not going to be italicized or underlined. You're going to capitalize the words according to Rule 13.2, and this you can see in Rule 14.2a. You'll include the reference year and cite the original section number. If the name begins with the word the, you want to go ahead and omit that. So in 14.2b, it talks about the title number. So for the United States Code, it actually has 53 titles. So you'll want to make reference to that. And sometimes you can also abbreviate certain things such as Internal Revenue Code and Title 26. That is actually something that you're going to see in Appendix 6. So 14.2C talks about abbreviating the name of the code. So after the title number, you're going to insert the abbreviated name of the code in ordinary type, followed by a space. In 14.2D, you're going to insert the section symbol. That's these little funky S symbols. There is a handout in the beginning module so that you can learn how to insert these symbols. They're very important. This is a skill that you definitely want to learn. And there's a handout for PC or Windows version of instructions, and then there's one for Mac. When we're talking about one statute, we're talking about the single statute symbol. Section symbol. If you're referencing multiple sections, then you're going to do the double symbol. So here's a couple of examples. So for a single section, this is how it's going to be written with one section symbol. But if you're talking about consecutive sections, you're going to use a double symbol. Or even scattered sections, you're going to use the double symbol. Please note the different ways to do these sections. Depending if you're referencing consecutive sections, you're going to use the dash in between the two sections. If it's two separate sections, then you're going to use a comma and a space. Please note that there is no spacing between the dash. In 14.2, statutory appendices and subdivisions. So there is a particular format to be using for that. So a statutory appendix is the APP period immediately following the title number and code abbreviation, followed by the pinpoint reference. So if we're talking about appendix, we're talking about APP period. If we're talking about note, you will actually put note at the end. Don't worry about the other two because they won't be used for this class. Rule 14.2 talks about publication parentheticals. For the official code, there's no need to indicate the publisher, just the date of the publication. For unofficial sources, you're going to identify the publisher and the date of publication. Again, the appendix is going to be your friend regarding that. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Occasionally, in 14.2, you might want to use explanatory parentheticals, meaning you want to describe something a little bit further, not just referencing the particular statute. So what you would do is put a space between the citation, and then you would do parentheses and the information that you want to include. We're going to be learning more about that in a different section. All right, 14.2H talks about citations of online sources. For this class, you will not need to know that, nor will you need to know the footnotes. In 14.3, these are federal statutes that are no longer in force. So in 14.3A, it tells you how to designate a federal statute that's been repealed or amended, and you do that by including that in the parenthetical. If something's been determined to be invalidated or declared unconstitutional, you'll use section B for that. And this is where you're going to have the italicized section of when it was held unconstitutional. So for 14.4, these are the full citations for state statutes. We're going to be spending a lot of time in the appendix covering this. So Appendix 1 will be your friend when it comes to this. So I'm actually going to jump over to Appendix 1. And this is on page 418. All right, so in Appendix 1, remember, we were looking for the official code as a preference. So that's going to be the one that has your star. And remember, Appendix 1 starts off with federal sources in Section A. And then Section B, you're going to jump into your state statutes. So the way to find your Constitution under the appendix, which is going to be your FAST format, if you're looking in Section 1A for federal, as you scroll down, you're going to get past all the court system, and then you're going to jump into your primary sources, which is your statutory compilations. And lo and behold, here are your different statutes that you can cite. And it's got the information right here, including the spaces, for you to know exactly how to include each little part of the format. And the Constitution for federal, let me see where they changed that. Yeah, so the US Constitution, you're going to be using the format that is in Rule 12. Now let's jump over to statutes for the state. So in Section B, you're going to have here all of your states in alphabetical order. So again, remember, you're going to bypass the court levels, and then you're going to go to statutory compilations. And then here you're going to find for Alabama, Alabama has actually 2 different reporters. So remember, we're always going to use the court reporter that is the official statutory compilation. So here's your format. So every state's going to be a little different. So you want to make sure that you're looking into each particular state. And for example, here is the one for Alaska. They also have 2 different ones. And if you notice, anytime you're using the annotated version, which is West, you will have West and then the year at the end. Let me find you a different state that might have a different source. Let's take a look at all right, let's look at California. California actually has a couple of different versions. So here is a different one by Deering. So if you notice, Deering will be in the parenthetical. Some of the statutory compilations will have abbreviated subjects. So if there is one, here it is. This is where you're going to find it. It's all located right here for you in the section in the back. So let's jump over to Florida real quick, because a lot of you are going to be working strictly in Florida. All right, so Florida has 3 statutory compilations. We have the Florida Statutes, which is our preferred source. And then you have an annotated version by West, and also an annotated version by LexisNexis. So here's providing for you the exact statute that you would use. So the appendix in the back is actually a really good resource because it's got everything built into it per area. A little bit further back, you will also find a great resource right after the last state. Sorry if this is making you dizzy. So it also has the US territories and their court system in here as well, including their statutory compilations. Now, the next thing I want to show you is Rule 5 and Rule 6. So that is going to be on page 21. So page numbers is something that we're going to learn more about when we get into the case citations. But for right now, I just want to point out a couple of things to you. So page numbers are going to be really important when we're talking about pinpoint references for cases. Again, pinpoint is exactly where I can find the information that you are referencing. So Rule 5 is going to tell you about page numbers for cases. So I just want you to know right now where that is located. But I do want you to look at whatchamacallit. We're going to learn about that later. The next rule, which is Rule 6, is the one that's got to do with statutes. So Rule 5 is for pinpoints on cases. Rule 6 is for pinpoints on statutes. So in Rule 6, you're going to see here that there are different subdivisions that can be used for particular statutes. This will depend on the manner that the statute is written for that particular state or for the federal source. So for example, if your state statute uses this kind of format, you have to keep the format the same as the way they have it, but these last numbers are going to be the subsections. So when we're talking about spacing and punctuation for these sections, this is going to be more of the Florida route, okay? So here you have the section symbol, then you have the space, and then you have your statute number. So this tells me that I am in statute number 1710, and I want you to pay particular attention to subsection B, subsection 3. So these are going to be set off in the parentheses, and you have to keep the format the same as the way the statute has it. Is it a big B or a little b? And here I'm basically telling you I'm looking at subsection B, and particularly even further, subsection 3, which means subsection 1 and 2 can be ignored. I'm only making reference to subsection 3. But it's really important for you to know where the spaces are at. So if you look at the incorrect example, it does not have a space between a statute symbol and the statute number. So you definitely want to make sure you have your spacing correct. Here on the right-hand side is when we're making reference to two different statute number sections. So I'm going to use my double SS. I'm going to have a space. I'm going to reference the first statute and its subsection, comma, space, and then the second section, section number. So there is a space right after the comma. So here's an incorrect way. So by sticking the space between the section symbols, which you don't want to do, and then leaving that space out. You do want to have that space written in there. All right, we're going to be learning about short citations later on in the semester, so you can skip that part. In section symbol, in section 6.2, when we're talking about a span, meaning you are wanting to include several statute numbers or several statute subsections, you're going to be using the dash. So here there's a hyphen and there's a dash, or you can use the word to as well. So if I'm talking about sections 1 through 55, I'm talking about every single statute number that is in between those. So here, because it's multiple statutes, we're going to be using the double section symbol. And if you want to use the word to, you have to make sure that your spacing is correct. Either one of these manners is perfectly fine. Just make sure to match the spacing. And if the spaces are scattered, you're going to use rule 6.3. So this means, in this example, it's multiple sections, statute sections. So I'm using my double statute section symbols. And then here I'm making reference to 1961, comma, space, 1963, comma, space, 1965. This is telling you that we are going to ignore 1962 and 1964. One more thing I wanted to explain to you is these little paragraph symbols. We're not going to be using that as part of this this course, but if you were talking about different paragraph numbers, that you would use that symbol. But for the purposes of this class, just stick to the section symbols. And let's say within the particular statute, I'm referencing only certain subsections. So here is where you're going to find A, subsection A, C, and E. These are the only subsections that we are talking about. Because we're referencing only one statute number, 1961, I'm only using one single section symbol because we're working within that one section. So please note, there is no space between the section and the subsection. Only if there's a comma space is where that's going to be included. And you just follow that particular format. The rest of Rule 6, we're not going to worry about for this class. Now let me go back over and show you one more thing about Rule 13 and 14. So the format is very particular. I need you guys to remember that every section is going to be ending with a period. I'm sorry, not every section. Every statute is going to be ending with a period. So for example, the US Constitution, once you're done with that citation, you're going to put a period at the end. The same thing with Rule 14. Oops, sorry. So Rule 14, when we're talking about the statute, notice that the format also ends with a period. So you will always have a period at the end. There's only one exception to the rule, which we're not going to learn about yet. But always end the citation for Constitution and for statutes with a period at the end. So on your homework, if you turn it in without the period at the end, it will be counted wrong.